We spoke briefly yesterday on the show with Alan West about what's occurring in Seattle, where you had Antifa and Black Lives Matter, the melding of these left-wing organizations, have declared a certain area. What the term we've been using is no-go zone. They have essentially taken charge and saying they run these areas and they are going to, they've taken them over, and there are something like 500 families living in this area, which is now being claimed by Antifa. And the demands that Antifa is putting out, they're not an orderly set of demands, but they are posters around the area telling people what they demand. One is they demand that the police department be defunded. That would be reasonable. Second, they are demanding that protesters not be prosecuted. They actually are saying protesters cannot be, that's part of the deal if they're going to ever give back this area. The protesters cannot be prosecuted. And third, they have this sign up, and I want to talk about it a little bit. It says, the cops will always be racist because capitalism requires inequality. And I mentioned this yesterday, as I deferred to it as intellectual idiocy, but the whole notion that somehow living in freedom creates inequality, or is that capitalism is unequal, is among the most absurd things. But it does give you a hint. It does give you a hint that this incident, all the riots we're watching and destruction of property and arson, these are not about what the most unfortunate incident that happened in Minneapolis, where the citizen George Floyd was killed by a police officer. The nation saw that on video. It was a horrible incident. We are very rightfully prosecuting the officer and the other 3 officers who stood around and let it happen. This is all a good thing to do, but what you can tell just from that little statement is that what they're not really here demanding justice or a list of changes in the conduct of police departments. They're wanting to push the end of capitalism. This is a leftist insurgency that has almost nothing to do with what happened in Minneapolis. They're using Minneapolis as a springboard. We also mentioned, I want to quickly, we have a guest joining in just a moment here, but there's a piece out of Heritage Foundation I wanted to recommend to you. Well, first of all, the story about Seattle is on our website, americacanwetalk.org. On the homepage under shows, drop down, list of links, you can read the story. There's also a piece out of Heritage that was talking about, there's been talk about whether the president should send troops in these various cities where the riots are continuing and using the Insurrection Act. But Heritage had a great thing up there talking about the Federal Anti-Riot Act. And I thought it was a good piece because it explains the justification for a president, for the federal government to use federal force if they have to. It's called the Federal Anti-Riot Act. And basically, it allows the federal government to go after anyone who travels in interstate or foreign commerce, or who uses any facility of interstate or foreign commerce, including not limited to mail, telegraph, telephone, blah, blah, to incite a riot, or to organize, promote, encourage, participate in, or carry on a riot, or to commit any act of violence in furtherance of a riot. This act was actually used to prosecute the 3 white supremacists who traveled from California to Virginia in August of 2017. So there is a history of its use. And I'm very, very much wishing we could see in this country the local officials, state and local officials, the governors of each state, take charge of their own state, use their own police forces, use their own law enforcement resources to shut down this rioting. It is not legitimate protest. I'm in favor of protests all day long. I love the First Amendment. I love freedom of speech. I love the idea. I've participated in protests, standing up for, not a lot, but a few times, stood up for waving signs to stand up for something. It's a beautiful thing about America. What we're watching in the destruction of America and the destroying of property and businesses and people's livelihoods, this is not a First Amendment protected protest. This is quite simply a criminal riot. These are looters, arsonists, robbers, thieves, rioters, and they need to be treated like criminals regardless of their political view on anything else. And America be very justified. I don't want to come to the federal government having just forcibly take control, but at some point they have to. And I think it's actually very helpful for American citizens who live in these states where the governors, mayors, police are kind of standing back and letting the rioters do their thing. very helpful for law-abiding citizens with leftist sympathies to be thinking, gee, you know, where is my safety coming from? Where is my protection coming from? So I want to close out the first 5 by saying I very much hope that we have an ability very quickly to bring America back into a law and order society and into lawfulness. And I do think, though, that at some point, not just the governors, but even the federal government has to get involved to crack down on rioters if there is jurisdiction, as described in the Riot Act. Just saying, if you're pursuing those kind of things, and there were prosecutions I saw, or arrests. I mean, there were 2 arrests recently, maybe many more, for people under that Riot Act, just saying because they traveled from wherever it was to some other state to pillage, rob, burn, and otherwise commit mayhem in those cities. So I think the federal government needs to get involved. I think President Trump's been right pretty much to stand back and say, come on, local officials, get on it. But they have the authority, and pretty soon they're going to have to start using it more forcibly, because Americans actually deserve to live in safety and freedom. And that, my friends, is today's First 5.